I'm very happy to welcome everybody to a fresh edition of the Azams Show. Today on the show, we are going to be talking about mental health illness. As we all know, mental health can cause severe physical and emotional health issues. So today on the show, I have with me an expert in that field who is going to talk us through why looking after our mental health is very important. My guest today is Gillian Fagan. Gillian, welcome to the Azams Show. Good to have you on my show. People are constantly talking about mental health issues all the time, including experts who are giving advice to those that are suffering from mental health problems. And today, I really appreciate the fact that you are here on my show to talk about it. We are going to be adding to that conversation as well. So, before we start, can you just take a moment to talk a bit about yourself and about what you do as a mental health advocate?
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for having me. My absolute pleasure to be here. As you know, I'm a huge, big advocate for diversity and also a massive advocate for mental health. About me, well, I really am an advocate of mental health because I see mental health not just as the absence of mental illness, but mental health really to me means well-being. It's that overall state of well-being that we all have mental health. And to have good mental health means being able to have the opportunity to reach your potential, to really accept who you are as a person and be okay with who you are as a person, to be able to deal and cope with the normal stresses that everyday life throws at you. So the idea of being a mental health advocate just means having good coping skills, embracing your resilience and being okay with who you are. As for what I do do a lot of things. I'm a qualified and accredited psychotherapist. I run a therapy centre called Under the Rainbow in Dublin City Centre. We work online and in face-to-face. And I also run a private practice called Core Therapy. I train corporates and companies and businesses on workplace wellness and beating burnout, on stress management, on conflict management, on change, all of these little things that add up to improved and a better sense of mental health. And in the therapy centre that I run, shameless plug, Under the Rainbow and Core Therapy, we offer low-cost therapy on a donation basis because I hate the idea of supports being inaccessible. Everybody deserves to have healthy mental health and good mental health and to have the opportunities that good mental health bring. So I guess for me being an advocate, it all stems from that. To me, mental health is a big part of diversity because when you have good mental health and when you have the opportunities to get support and improve your well-being and your wellness, well, that means then you have more potential and you have better opportunities all around in life, in career, in family, and through community as well.
A person that is having a mental health breakdown can suddenly start to see the world so differently, especially if they are constantly having, feelings of anxiety and hopelessness as they start thinking the worst of themselves and can even think about ending their own existence. So what do you think triggers people into feeling their worst, and what can they do to avoid having these kinds of feelings?
Every single one of us gets anxious from time to time, Carol, for sure. Like before going for an interview or doing an exam or even just before your wedding, depending. So everybody knows what it feels to have experienced anxiety. But I guess where it becomes a problem is when it becomes an anxiety disorder. And when we think about what anxiety is, it stems from our whole survival instinct, that idea of fight or flight. Without anxiety, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Our entire wiring for humanity to survive and to evolve is built on this survival mechanism that unfortunately nowadays can lead to anxiety disorder, getting overwhelmed, getting stressed. One of the biggest triggers I find for stress and anxiety is overwhelm. We're too busy these days. There are so many things to do. We have much faster paces of life. We're expected to have do all of the things all of the time and have a much higher standard of output. Um, like there's so many expectations that society put on us, and I often talk about this comparisonitis that social media brings, which is a massive trigger for, well, you use the phrase mental breakdown, but a massive trigger for mental health stressors and feeling distressed and having that sense of not good enough. I do find that one of the massive triggers that brings people into my room for sure for therapy is this sense of not being good enough, not fitting in with society or for fitting in with other people's expectations. So when you think of who is society, we're all society. Everybody is society. We all make up society, but yet as a group, we seem to have these very unrealistic expectations on who we are and what we do. So around what you can do to avoid having feelings like those feelings of mental stress, you can't really avoid anxiety and you can't really avoid stress and you can't really avoid hopelessness, because these are par for the course in everyday things. And it's because of these stressors that basically promote us to thrive and be better and succeed and strive for something better than. So it's that edge that gives us this idea of keep going, and that's evolution. So I wouldn't necessarily live a life where you're trying to avoid stress, but it does need to be managed. And being aware of your own triggers and your own limits are very important. There's no easy way to kind of answer that because everybody has different limits and different triggers. I know I might be preaching to the choir when I say this, but overall, a good, healthy lifestyle, that's the best place to start. A balanced diet, good sleep, staying hydrated, getting fresh air, being part of a community, having support systems in place. These are really the things that mean people do better when they feel hopelessness or when they feel anxiety or when they are stressed or overwhelmed. Because if you have that fundamental structure of overall wellness in place, it means that your coping mechanisms are easier to tap into. You're more resilient then. You can deal with loss or trauma or stress in a better way because you've already got self-care as a given. So I would always say to people, like, don't leave it until a crisis to seek the supports and then look at improving your overall well-being. That should be par for the course anyway, to look at, okay, what can I do to improve my self-care so that I am more resilient, so that I am well, so that I am stronger as a person. And that would basically be the best piece of advice I could give on I guess, managing and avoiding those kind of feelings. But I'm not a fan of avoiding any of the feelings. Feel the feelings, process the feelings, and then do the healing.
Can you describe what it's like to work with mental health clients? What are some of the challenges that you as a practitioner face, during the course of your work with your clients?
It's an interesting point. What it's like to work with mental health clients. Well, every single person I meet in my line of work is potentially a mental health client. Everybody has mental health. Everybody does. And even on that, I like to think of it as mental fitness. We've no problem going to a personal trainer or going to the gym and looking after our physical fitness. Our minds are just as, maybe even more important than our bodies. So I'd be a big advocate for mental fitness. And I think to train your mind for mental fitness and resilience is so important. So what it's like to work with people, to be honest, cliche as this might sound, it's living the dream. I worked in finance for 20 years. Now that I am helping people empower themselves, it's the most fulfilling work I have ever done. It's cliche to say it, but it's a bit of a vocation. And I guess I've always worked with helping people going back to the 90s, and this gives away part of my age. In the early to mid 90s, I used to visit people in a psychiatric hospital and just sit down and talk to people and have that connection, that fundamental deep human connection of just conversing, of seeing somebody and witnessing somebody and being seen in return. So in my line of work every single day, I'm very blessed that that's what I get to live, connecting with people and helping people see who they really are and accept themselves. It's incredibly empowering for everybody. It really is. You're right, though, it does bring its challenges. As a mental health practitioner, you can't help everybody, no matter how hard I try. During COVID, during this whole lockdown period, I have been so busy. I used to, and I still do to a point, these free care calls on Mondays and Wednesdays. And within a week, I was booked out, and people be booking in nearly a month in advance for a free care call. I'm self-employed. I do what I can, where I can, when I can. So I tend to work nearly every day, 7 days a week, trying to help people. And if I'm not the person who can best help somebody, I will put my heart and soul into finding somebody who can. The problem is, as a practitioner, as a psychotherapist myself, I am completely fully booked. I have a waiting list. But I do run a therapy center and I have a good network of other therapists that I can refer to. The problem with that is saying no. I hate saying no to somebody, or in terms of if I have the skills that I can help them help themselves. It's very difficult to say no. And sometimes as a mental health practitioner, you have to have these boundaries in place. That can be very difficult, especially when you're as passionate about the work as we are in Under the Rainbow and Core Therapy. So burnout is a very, very big problem in my profession. A lot of therapists will take on too much or do too much or not have the self-care in place. The idea of walk the walk. So I think one of the biggest challenges for me is sometimes I will do things with people, with communities, for people. And I have done in the past at the expense then to say my own self-care or my own downtime or my private time. And that has been a real challenge this year with COVID, because we all need to help each other and support each other. As the saying goes, we're in this together. So just the idea of being able to offer those supports, helping each other out. We are all in this together, but that in itself can be a challenge. I am quite an extroverted person, but I need my downtime. I need my introverted time. I need those silent moments where I can just catch up with myself, and booking those appointments and scheduling that into my diary has actually been one of the best ways I've been able to manage that, because otherwise the diary gets booked out and you think, oh, I'll get to that eventually in terms of my own self-care. And I joke about having started the Couch to 5K umpteen times this year and not being able to finish it because life happens and gets in the way. So I think definitely as a mental health practitioner, minding my own mind and self-care and looking after myself is a big challenge for mental health practitioners, because we are in this line of work to help others, but you have to start with helping yourself.
My next question really borders around the impact of this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, on mental health. I am assuming that lockdowns have created a lot of stress in people, which means that issues of mental health must have increased. Can you please talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, as we were just saying, you're right, COVID. The COVID pandemic has absolutely had such a toll on people's mental health. Everybody has suffered or struggled in some way. And I do know some people that have said COVID has been great for their business, or it's given them the permission to slow down, whereas they might have been too stressed before. So while there is the odd exception where a person has said, oh, COVID has been an advantage, it has brought up challenges for people's mental health, definitely. Like when you think about the struggles that COVID would put on people's mental health, there's so many. We're talking about uncertainty. Really and truly, we don't like not knowing things. We don't like an ambiguous future. When we are uncertain about things, our anxiety goes up because that's our survival instinct. When we are uncertain about something, there could be a perceived danger. And that makes us more anxious and more stressed. So uncertainty, and even the idea, and I know this week there's news, there's a vaccination on the way, but there's a lot of uncertainty around that as well, and the expectation as to when can I access this, and how it leaves us with more questions than answers in many ways. So definitely uncertainty. Change has, we struggle with change. Some people like change. I like change personally, but there's always an adjustment period with change. And change can be a massive adjustment, especially, and I've had such an increase in demands for couples therapy because where both partners have been working from home. That's a massive change. And if you are only seeing the one person day in, day out without having your colleagues or your coffee breaks or going out for lunch, that can be a challenge. So change and uncertainty seem to be the main things. But another thing that I'm finding is really impacting on people's mental health this year is isolation. I spoke to a client actually only yesterday who told me that they haven't touched another human being, not even a handshake, since February because of the situation this year. Like, that's heartbreaking. So the isolation for some people is massive. For people who live alone, perhaps, the lack of touch. And I'm not even necessarily talking about intimate touch, but just human beings, we are tactile. We get a boost in our oxytocin just from hugs and handshakes and touch and crowds. And we're being deprived of that. And oxytocin is a chemical that boosts our overall sense of happiness. Without having that, that in itself will have an impact on your mental health, even if you're an introvert and the best introvert in the world. So there are some struggles in there. Never mind then the obvious things such as work-life balance, grief in some case, loss, ambiguity, bereavement, health issues. And what I found as well is a big thing is this understanding of almost differing boundaries. So I might have a different understanding of what physical distance means to you. I might have a different way of minding my family's health and minding my own health to you, for example. And I can see a lot of people getting frustrated with parties that are going on or group gatherings or people who are anti-mask, and that's bringing up a whole lot of stress for people again. And it's about really looking at what you can do on your own personal level and trying to just control and accept what you can. But it definitely is an issue. And I'm finding when I talk to clients around this year and COVID and mental health, the ambiguous loss, the things people don't even realize they're losing, like a simple frothy coffee, not a big deal, but it's the tiny little things. The idea of listening to your music or a podcast on the bus. This whole idea now of everything being brought back to health, of course it makes us more anxious, because the idea if somebody now sits beside you on a bus, that's a massive stress trigger, whereas before we wouldn't have really noticed. So yeah, it's definitely had a big issue on our mental health. And I have never been so busy, and same with the therapy centre too. So we just have to try and do our best to mind our minds and tap into the resilience that we already have. We're incredibly resilient. Humanity is absolutely astounding, everything we have survived. And I find that really useful just to remind ourselves of everything that we've been through and that we've survived already, so we can get through this.
I also think that there is so much stigma attached with mental health conditions in general, especially cultural stigma. Take, for example, where I come from in Nigeria, people don't like to talk openly about it because to a lot of people, it also signifies something that is dark and evil. So when they're talking about mental health illness, it means they're referring to somebody who has lost their minds and deserve to be locked away in a mental institution. But it is very different in the West. People not only talk about mental health illness, they acknowledge it as an illness. They seek the help that they deserve and ultimately get cured. And in addition to that, they also learn different ways to better manage what goes on in their head and go on to take control of their mind. So, what would be your advice for people with mental health problems who feel too embarrassed to seek help, either due to cultural perceptions or for any other reasons?
Yeah, I agree. There still is. It is so unfortunate. And you made a very good point there, Carol, regarding the cultural stigma, for sure. There really is still a stigma in around mental health. And I think a lot of it is to do with the language. When people hear mental health, there's an assumption or a connection of mental illness, whereas every human has mental health, regardless of whether it's in good mental health or bad mental health. And that is why I personally prefer to use the words mental fitness rather than mental health. As I said, you've no problem keeping your body fit. Why not keep your mind fit? When it comes to mental health or mental fitness, think of it in terms of minding your mind. If you need sleep, you sleep. If you're hungry, you eat. If you need to do something to mind your mind, there really shouldn't be a shame in that. And do you know something? It's a good point in terms of accessing services. That's one thing that COVID has actually been very beneficial for, is the accessibility of services now. A lot of people are able to do online therapy or phone therapy, telehealth and e-health. That has absolutely boomed. So the whole idea of accessing mental health services might not seem as difficult as before. And I have had, definitely in our therapy centre, we've had contacts from people all across the globe looking for support and looking for services. So if it's something that you like in a small town or a small village that there isn't support in place, or you don't want to be seen to go to the one and only therapist or counselor, well then go beyond that. So that's the great thing about the internet. I have a lot of issues. I personally have a lot of issues with social media, but it has its advantages too. We can connect with other like-minded individuals through social media or support groups or online forums. Like, I'm not sure statistically what the numbers are on a global basis, but in Ireland, like half of the Irish population will experience a mental health difficulty at some stage in their life. Those numbers are too high to still have a stigma around it. And yet, in a workplace, when I do surveys, like people are still ashamed or afraid to tell their employer that they're struggling or they're stressed. So the stigma still does exist, but there are huge campaigns and a lot of work being done on lowering the stigma, making services more accessible, and having conversations around mental health. And I'm sure you doing what you do, Carol, you see that a lot around even celebrities, the likes of in Ireland anyway, Brezzy and Brent Pope, talking about their mental health. And I think that the more I have a real thing about celebrities should just do what they're good at and shouldn't necessarily be given agency on every topic. But when you do see a leader, whether that be a celebrity or a politician, talk about their own mental health and their own struggles, it means it normalizes a lot more for the rest of us. So for somebody who is struggling, my advice is to maybe go online, look at what supports you can get outside of your community, what supports you can get. But I would also suggest that you have a look at your own self-care. Support has to start with self, and sometimes that includes asking for help. I always say self-care has to include asking for help. We thrive in community. We thrive as a community, and it's how we heal. So if you're not finding those resources within your family or within your village or within your community, that's the brilliant thing about online. We can access so many more communities who can help us heal. Failing that, we can access online or telephone therapy as well to talk to a professional who might be able to help you. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Thank you for that. Obviously, there are medical treatments and medications widely available to help people who are struggling with their mental health and well-being. What other ways are there, outside of the medical environment? By that I mean, like, is there a more holistic approach for people to support their loved ones and help them overcome their mental conditions?
As a psychotherapist, yeah, I don't prescribe, so I don't get into the medical model, but I often would work with clients with a support team, an entire mental health team, which would often include access to medication or to a medical practitioner. But I think when it comes to any kind of mental health, it has to be looked at holistic, because we're not talking about one part of the person, we're talking about the whole person. And when you look at how everything is interconnected, like your mind, your health, your physicality, your diet, your sleep, all of these things, if something is off sync, it can have an impact on your mental health. So it has to be looked at in a holistic view completely, because it's the whole person. And there's such a connection between food and mood, community and healing, friendships and stress, and even our sense of purpose in life and how that impacts on our mental health. So what you do in terms of your education or your career has a direct impact on mental fitness. So the idea of how to support people to basically talk, to get support. We connect through our conversations. We share stories, and we find, and I find this as a diversity trainer, especially when we share our stories, that's where we relate to people. We might meet somebody who we might think has a world so different to ours. And when we start talking about the stories and sharing who we are and where we've come from, we can all identify. So I absolutely agree that the holistic approach is the best way. And I often say to clients when they start coming into me and they have mental health struggles, to just look at genuinely, are they getting fresh air? Are they hydrating? Have they got a balanced diet? My area of specialism is in the mind, but everything is so connected. We don't live as these separate beings. Like our brains, which I guess we say make up our mental health because of how our chemicals are produced, they're connected to our parasympathetic response system. So like, for example, Carol, if you're feeling anxious, you might get a dry mouth, you might get maybe butterflies in your stomach and sweaty palms. It's all connected. So we have to take a holistic approach. To mind your mind means minding your whole self, for sure.
What would you do if a family member who you know was struggling with their mental health condition refused to allow you to be a part of their support system?
Thanks for raising that question. It's a very difficult one to answer, this idea of if somebody won't get help, what can you do to support them? Or if they don't want you to be a part of their support system. It is difficult because, and I get asked questions along that kind of vein quite a lot. The idea of support, as I said, we heal best in community and we heal best with support. Like, for example, in my family, given that I am a therapist, I'm probably not the best person to then give that support to my family. I can't be their therapist. So I would often refer them to somebody else. But if it's a case that you do have a loved one who is struggling, but they don't want you to be part of their support network, to even acknowledge that, to say, okay, I see that you're struggling and I appreciate that, and give the person back a sense of agency. It's very important that people have the power and their own voice and the advocacy to basically design their own support system. Now, not everybody is able to, granted, but where somebody can. And if you're not going to be a part of that, for example, a parent and a child might not want a parent to be part of the support system, to sit down and create a plan with them, but giving that person the sense of agency themselves for self-advocacy. One of the biggest things around mental health is finding your voice, to empower yourself. And that means creating your own mental health support system. If you don't want a particular family member to be a part of that, that's absolutely okay. And bearing in mind, when we love somebody, we have biases. We always see someone else's potential, and that can be a very dangerous thing, because the problem with that is we often say to somebody, oh, you should. And if I could ban one word, Carol, from the English language, from any language, it would be the word should. I think it's a very dangerous word. So what I would say, if you're in that situation where you're finding that you're not welcome or invited to offer support, is to acknowledge it and have compassion and understanding for that person. That person might know what they want, and it might not be you. And then at the end of the day, it's not about you. It's about them. It's about them designing their mental health support systems. It's about them advocating for themselves. So if you cannot be the person to support them even to perhaps help them and signpost them to places or people who can, and then stay out of it. Every now and again, check in on them, invite them to have a conversation, just say, hey, I'm here if you need to talk. I'm here if you'd like to talk. I'm here to support you. But what I would always say is even to ask the person, what do you need? How can I support you? Don't assume. We rush in trying to save the day. And I used to do this in the past. Everybody wants to be a hero, right? But it's not about you. So to ask the person, what can I do to support you? And if that person says nothing, then you can say, fine, I'm here whenever you change your mind. I'm here if you ever need me. I'm here to support you, whatever that looks like. And if that means minding your own business, that's what you have to do. But it is a difficult and tricky one. And of course, each case might be different. In Ireland, yeah, there are people talk about healthcare being inaccessible and that there are really long waiting lists. And there are. And like at the end of the day, it's very confusing. Do I do counseling, coaching, psychotherapy, psychology? Do I see a psychiatrist, a GP? Like the list is endless. And at the end of the day, it's about finding the system and the person that works best for you. I really would suggest initially starting with talk therapy, even if that's just 4 to 6 sessions to see how that sits with you. It's a really good starting point. And if your therapist or counsellor or psychotherapist feels that you would benefit from further services like talking with a GP or accessing medication or talking with a psychologist, they may refer you on to other mental health services. But if you feel that you can't access therapy because it's too expensive or there are too long waiting lists, most of the colleges that train counsellors and psychotherapists also offer a low-cost service or have access to places that do offer low-cost services. Some of the colleges might be Turning Point, the Tivoli Institute, Dublin Business School, PCI College, IICP, and these are colleges that do psychotherapy and counselling training that might also be able to then signpost you to where you can access low-cost therapy for therapists who are just nearing the end of their training. In Under the Rainbow, we offer therapy on a donation basis. So I absolutely hate the idea of mental health and supports being inaccessible. So if somebody has issues around affordability, they can work with us on a donation basis. So a lot of therapy centres do offer low cost therapy as well. So that's something to look into. Because if you do go via your GP for talk therapy, you will probably be referred via the HSC and be on a waiting list, whereas really you can access these services yourself, but part of the problem is finding the right person. However, it's taken back that sense of power and that sense of agency and trying to find that right person that works for you. So interview your therapist or your counsellor or your coach, screen them, have what's called a chemistry call or a free consultation and see if you'd be comfortable talking with that person. I cannot stress this enough. I really think the idea of self-advocacy is really key to getting good mental health supports rather than being stuck with somebody you've been referred to. So shop around. I also highly recommend the Samaritans. They're the people who take their calls are very highly skilled and highly trained. And if you need to contact them, the Samaritans in Ireland, the number is 116 123. It's anonymous, it's free, and it's just to talk about what's going on. So in a moment of crisis or overwhelm or strength, they definitely are. They really do come in handy. Of course, there's Pieta House, who I'm sure you've heard of. They help with suicide prevention and supports around that as well. If you Google Pieta House and find out where your local centre is, usually they would work with somebody on around 6 weekly sessions and work with somebody around basic self-care and just taking somebody out of that crisis place, and really does work quite well. The number for Pieta House is 601 0000, and definitely worth looking into, especially if you are feeling suicidal or self-harm. And another thing, like there are umpteen, if you Google, and the HSC has a great list on their website, and actually if you go to Acora Therapy, my own website, I have a list of all of the resources, not all, but some of the resources that would be available as well. It really does depend on what's going on for you and what help you need. But on that as well, Aware do fantastic life skills course, which is basic kind of CBT and coaching around just helping you develop your own resilience and improve on the current life skills that you have and work at what you've got. And I would really strongly recommend you do that. Aware these courses online. They were working in person as well as online. So they've been doing online since before it was a thing. So it's usually a 6 to 8 week course, I believe. And again, a lot of my clients have gone through the Aware life skills course and rave about it and have gotten great value from it. So check out the aware.ie website, or I think, yeah, their number is 1800 80 48 48. So there are supports out there, but it might mean a little bit of legwork on the person's part. At the end of the day, we are all in this together. It is important that we're able to support each other. And if you're finding that you're not somebody who is struggling these days, well, then it might be a good potential or opportunity for you to be a lighthouse for other people and help guide the way.
On a final note, Gillian, where is help available in Ireland? And also, before you go, can you please expand a little bit, just a little bit more, with tips on how to cope with mental health conditions? Thank you so much, Gillian, for coming on the show. And thank you so much for sharing this vital information about mental health.
Oh, Carol, that absolutely flew by. Anytime. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Any questions, please do get in touch. Gillian Fagan is my name. I am the CEO of Under the Rainbow, which is a diversity training company and workplace wellness. I run a therapy centre in Capel Street, Under the Rainbow, and check out Acora Therapy. And of course, feel free to follow us on social media. Thank you so much, Carol. It's been a pleasure.
This has brought us to the end of another episode of the Carol Azams Show. My guest today has been an expert in the field of mental health illness. I hope you have learned a few things from her, tips on how to look after yourself and look after your mental health. Until I come your way again next time, it's goodbye from me.